Good morning, happy Wednesday, and welcome to Coffee and Conversations in Special Education. Today, we're going to be talking about, as we throw ourselves into March, Mental Health Awareness Month. We're going to be talking about today mental health and the IEP, the Individualized Educational Plan. Now, what I want you to think about and understand is that although I have a focus in Coffee and Conversations this month on mental health, because it happens to be March, this is something that we need to consider and think about for every student in every IEP meeting, because we cannot separate mental health struggles, mental health disorders, emotionality, and behavior from a student's school experience and from a student's ability to learn. Our emotionality, our behavior, our mental health, it impacts every area of learning, our academic output, our experience as we get to that output, our interpersonal relationships with others, our social skills. It really cannot be separated when we think about the whole child, and it can't be relegated to a certain month. It needs to be discussed and contemplated and thought about in every IEP meeting as it relates to the student. Now, with that said, IDA, federal law, guarantees all students with disabilities with a free, appropriate public education. What does that mean? We talk about this a lot. To receive a free, appropriate public education, it means that the education, the programming, the accommodations, the modifications, the methodology, the strategies, all that's in place for the child to support the child was reasonably calculated to lead to meaningful educational benefit. And so if a student requires psychological services, counseling, a behavior intervention plan that goes beyond the basic behavior charts and has a remediation aspect to it and has professionals involved that are of higher qualifications or training than a regular education teacher or a special education teacher, then those are things that we have determined are required for the student to receive meaningful educational benefit. Now, it's not to say that a student automatically is eligible or qualifies for an individualized educational plan on the basis alone that they have a mental health disorder. The most common mental health disorders that we see in the school system are depression and anxiety disorder. We know that many of our students with ADHD have emotionality, self-regulation, and frustration tolerance components that are a manifestation of their ADHD. Those must be addressed in the IEP as well, even if they don't hold a standalone mental health disorder in addition to the ADHD. And the same as what I'm saying is true for any one of the 13 categories that a student is found eligible for under IDA. But simply having a mental health diagnosis by itself doesn't mean that the student shows evidence of a need for specialized instruction in order to access his or her curriculum and in order to gain meaningful educational benefit and therefore receive a free, appropriate public education. Sometimes students with mental health disorders needs are appropriately met through a 504 accommodation plan, but not always. And oftentimes I find that, and I say this across the board, not just having to do with mental health, but if all we're doing is accommodating, prompting all day long, redirecting all day long, yes, accommodations are important. They're giving necessary access. But if we're needing to do that constantly and consistently and with the same kind of frequency year to year, then we're not providing the intervention piece or the remediation piece or the educational piece that the student needs to increase their independence and not require that level of prompting at a certain point. Almost every presentation that I do, I refer back to this crucial point. And that is that the goal of special education in all cases is to, yes, give access, but also increase the independence of the student so that they can have a successful, meaningful, contributory, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but you know what I mean, post-secondary life, for whatever that means for them. And so where mental health, where psychological factors have reached a level that it is impacting the student's learning and impacting any area of their school life. And I always remind parents and other educators that the 5 domains of the IEP include curriculum and instruction, that's the academics, independent functioning, social emotional, that's a real big one when it comes to mental health, healthcare, right? And if you have a mental health disorder, that is a medical diagnosis, right? And it can be mentioned in the healthcare section of the IEP. And if your child requires medication during the school day, then that also needs to be contemplated. Somebody needs to give that medication, needs to be noted in the IEP, not just sent with the student in their backpack or assumed that it'll be done with fidelity. There might be a school nurse that will be the one that will be giving the medication. That is 99.9% of the time who does this. That individual is not responsible for the monitoring of the medication and making decisions about next steps with medication. So that's an important distinction. And the last domain is communication. And sometimes, even if a student doesn't have speech language needs to be addressed by a speech language pathologist, their communication due to a mental health disorder might have a breakdown socially, and we also need to address that. So think of it within that context. Is there a need for specialized instruction in order to give the student access to meaningful educational benefit and therefore a free, appropriate public education? If the answer is yes, then we should be looking at IEP eligibility. And if the child already has an IEP, has already been made eligible, but if those characteristics that are a result of their mental health disorder, or if emotionality or behavior has become elevated to a point that it requires specialized instruction, then we need to convene an interim IEP meeting, an amendment meeting, where we revisit and relook at the IEP across those 5 domains to make common sense, reasonable determinations so that this student's mental health struggles that are coming into the school level and disrupting their ability to learn or disrupting their ability to make meaningful human connections with staff, teachers, and peers is addressed. Because in the end of the day, yes, the IEP is in order to give educational academic access, but it has to give access in all areas of school life, in all areas that are impacted within the school building. And that goes deeper than just academics. And we know, like I began this presentation, we know that if my mental health, if my emotionality reaches a level that it's affecting my learning, I can't separate academic interventions from the mental health emotional interventions. If you have any questions, this was really intended to be an intro to the topic. But if you have any questions for me, I'll be sitting here enjoying this coffee. I'll be commenting back to you. And I just want to also let you know that all month of March, we'll be having different pop-up coffee and conversations. I have a co-host coming up that I'm going to announce soon that has a specialty in trauma-informed IEPs. I'm super excited about that. I also have other events outside of coffee and conversations that are coming up. So periodically, please check on the page, please check our events, and let me know if I can be